All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I've got 3:55 or close enough to it. Good afternoon. I'm Mel Bell, the chair of the Menhaden board. I'm going to call to order the May 1st meeting of the Atlantic Menhaden Management Board. First item would be approval of the agenda. Any edits to the agenda, any modifications? Don't see any hands, so the agenda will stand approved by consensus. Approval of the proceedings from our February 1st meeting. Any edits necessary to the proceedings from the February 1st meeting of the Menhaden board? I don't see any hands. Oh, was that a hand? Oh, okay. All right, don't see any hands for edits, so if there's no objection, then the proceedings will stand approved by consensus. That takes us to public comment. I'd like to have anyone that is in the room for public comment go first, and then if we have people online, we'll shift over. So I know we have at least one person in the room. We can go ahead and get started. Phil, if you'd like to take 3 minutes and provide public comment, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chairman Bill. My name is Phil Zalzak, and I fish in the Chesapeake Bay. The subject is localized depletion of Atlantic menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay. Localized depletion of Atlantic menhaden is occurring in the Chesapeake Bay and is adversely impacting predators dependent on Atlantic menhaden for their survival. This includes striped bass, bluefish, weakfish, and osprey. I've attached a position paper to my written comments, and I would like you and your technical committee to review it. The Virginia Marine Resources Commission held 2 meetings last fall in October and December in response to a number of complaints regarding the purse seine reduction fishery in and around the Chesapeake Bay. Here is the sworn testimony of those who address localized depletion. Steve Atkinson, president of the Virginia Saltwater Sports Fishing Association, presented a petition signed by over 9,000 anglers asking the governor to take action on the Atlantic menhaden reduction fishery. In September, he previously presented a joint letter signed by 21 fishing, business, and environmental groups calling on the governor to move reduction fishing out of the Chesapeake Bay until science demonstrates the high volume reduction fishing can be allowed without negatively affecting the broader bay ecosystem. Christy Medise of Silver Beach, Virginia, testified regarding fish spills on beaches impacting the health and safety of Virginia residences, the negative impact of purse seine scraping the bottom of the bay in terms of bycatch destruction, and negative impact localized depletion is having on the Virginia Eastern Shore economy. Dr. Stephen Zalzak and Phil Zalzak presented evidence that the VMRC is in violation of section 28.2-203 of the Code of Virginia. Michael Academia, formerly of William and Mary College, presented data from 50 years of research documenting the unsustainability of osprey in the Chesapeake Bay. His paper received an international award, has gone through peer review, and was published in Frontiers of Marine Science magazine, April 20th, 2023. William Pappas, representing over 15 charter captains, stated that Virginia does not have a healthy fishery and that the menhaden population coastwide does not represent what's happening in Virginia waters. The VMRC completely ignored the issue of localized depletion, ignored the most recent science regarding Atlantic menhaden migration, and wrote an unenforceable MOU according to counsel assigned to the VMRC. That was on December 6th of 2022. I would like to see localized depletion as an agenda item at the August board meeting. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. Also, I'll point out that we've received over 90 pages of public comment already that you received in the materials for the meeting, as well as some emails with additional public comment. So is there anyone here in the room that would like to make comment? I don't see any hands. Anybody online?
Jim Fletcher is first.
Okay, Jim Fletcher, if you'd like to go first, got 3 minutes, please.
I'd like to address the chemicals in the water that are affecting the Atlantic Menhaden and why ASMFC has not done some basic research. I brought up a couple of years ago the hybrid menhaden that were found in the St. Johns and St. Mary's River off of Florida, and the decline in menhaden in North Carolina, which none of us understood. I now understand after seeing the advertisements for the litigation in Camp Lejeune military base from man-made chemicals affecting birth of humans. All of that water that came from Camp Lejeune flowed out into the rivers. And I asked ASMFC to ask their staffs, and I'm jumping subjects from menhaden to weakfish, could this be the reason the chemicals in the water that the weakfish disappeared and nobody could find them? Could it also be the reason that the calico scallops off of North Carolina disappeared? Are we missing the topic of the chemicals that man is putting into the rivers and sounds and ocean? Every day we see new chemicals coming out that are protein-based to remove stains from dishes and clothes. But we're not addressing the problem of what do these do to the membranes of eggs and the fish that are protein. I think ASMFC, before we go down the line of further banning or talking about stopping one group of fishermen, we need to look at the effects of the chemicals. And I would ask ASMFC to invite the Environmental Protection Agency to come to one of your meetings of what they know about chemicals in the water and how it affects the fish. I don't think it's the fishermen or the fisheries. I think it's the chemicals in the water, and I thank you for your time and allowing me to talk.
All right, thank you, Jim, for your input and observations. And Debbie Campbell, if you'd like to take 3 minutes, go ahead.
Yes, Debbie Campbell. I have a cottage at Silver Beach. In fact, I'm working from here today as I dial into this meeting. I sent you a number of materials in advance of the meeting and appreciate the response that they had been received and that they had been circulated to the members. I agree with Phil Zalzak's comments and hope that you have all had time to review my materials. This is such an important matter. I mean, I can tell you, I did tell you in my letter what I have observed personally, that there's nothing left but tiny, tiny, tiny little schools of menhaden. We used to have these huge balls of menhaden that just bubbled across the surface. And, you know, the reduction fishing boats are just out here all day, pretty much every day. And it is destroying the bay. And you have the authority to actually change something, because what has been done in the past is not working, or we would not see this steady exponential decline. And it's heartbreaking. And I beg you to take this under advisement and to maybe change your tact. The science is there. And the neighbors' voices are there. We're telling you firsthand, we don't make money off the fishery. We would like to be able to catch dinner. We would like not to have dead fish all over our beaches and those horrific kills from the bycatch like we saw at Kipta-Peak. So I thank you all for your service, and I'm really, really prayerful that you're going to see this from our perspective and make some real protective changes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Debbie, for your input prior to and at the meeting here. That's it. Okay. That's all we have. That'll end the public comment period. In the interest of moving along, we'll move to our next agenda item, which would be a review of a report of the Atlantic Menhaden fishery from Virginia. So recall at the last meeting, we had asked Pat or the Commonwealth to provide us with a summary of what all has been going on in Virginia. We've received a lot of public comment at various meetings over opinions about what's going on in the Bay, observations, a lot of pages of material, but you know, we've not really kind of heard from Virginia what's going on with the fishery for the past few years. So Pat, you've got and you've seen Pat's report. The report is actually in the briefing materials, very thorough. Thank you very much. But he's going to work us through an actual little presentation here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the board to hear an update from Virginia on the Menhaden fisheries. Next slide, please. Just real quickly, I think most of you are aware that Menhaden was managed by our General Assembly prior to 2020. It's the only fish species in the state that was managed by the General Assembly, which makes it very difficult when ASMFC comes up with a mandate to respond to. When Amendment 3 was passed in 2017, BMRC tried to get the General Assembly to change that bay cap to the 51,000 metric tons 2 years in a row, and it didn't occur. In September of 2019, BMRC reported that the reduction fleet, we reported to ASMFC that the reduction fleet did exceed the bay cap of 51,000 metric tons. We sat at the annual meeting in October, and all the states, including Virginia, unanimously agreed that Virginia was out of compliance with Amendment 3 because we did not adopt the new, it was 87,126 metric tons, and it was now 51,000 metric tons. In December, the Secretary of Commerce concurred with that finding and said Virginia had until June 16th to address the issue or of compliance, or that there would be a moratorium declared on the whole fishery, not just the reduction, but on the bait fishery as well. Next slide, please. In March so as a result of that, there was a flurry of legislative action in 2000, during the 2000 session. There were a lot of bills introduced. Senate Bill 791 and House Bill 1448 were the winners that finally got approved in both houses and signed by the governor, which gave Virginia Marine Resources Commission the authority to manage Menhaden. In those bills, it also included the establishment of Menhaden Management Advisory Committee, which was up to 12 Virginia residents, including folks from the industries, NGOs, conservation groups, and recreational angling groups as well, that meets twice a year. You'll hear about some more of the things that they've done in a second. In April of that year, the BMRC board approved those changes, so it became official in April. And we also, for that year, we lowered the bay cap to 36,196 metric tons because Amendment 3 required a payback for the overage. So our quota was lower that year. And just in the summertime, just in June through August of 2021 and through September in 2020, June through August and June through September in 21, we had 4 net spills each year. The ones in 2020 were in the ocean. And in 2021, there were 2 that were in the bay. One of them was over 400,000 fish that were reported in those spills, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But we do have spills from this fishery almost every year. As Ms. Campbell pointed out, some of those do come ashore because if the wind and currents are inappropriate, I guess is the right word. You want to say correct because it's coming ashore. It's not a good thing. Next slide, please. In 2022 was a really busy year for us. In June, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership teamed up with state and national fishing and conservation groups and requested that Governor Youngkin move the Omega fleet out of the bay until which time research shows that industrial fishing for Menhaden can be supported within the ecosystem. Also in June of that year, our MRC board approved amendments to our regulation, which allowed transfers, and I'll go into that in a second as well. We had 3 more spills in July of 2020, 2 right back to back, and where Ms. Campbell lives in Silver Beach, and a few days, about 2 weeks later in Kiptopeke. I'll talk about that in a second. And then it's all culminated with December 2020, where we had a public hearing to discuss all these things. The governor was involved, and I'll get into more details on that. So next slide, please. At one of the recent commission meetings, somebody caught me in the elevator and said to me, he goes, it seems like Virginia is a glutton asking for transfer of quota when we get, 75.21% of the coastwide quota. But as you can see from here, we further divide that. Initially it was in code, but now it's in regulation, where the per se reduction gets 90% of that. The per se bake gets 8.4, and all other gears get 1.6% of that quota. There was no mechanism to have transfers internally between those. And if any state wanted to transfer quota to us, which some have done so, it would have to go in those percentages. Virginia is the biggest supplier of bait, crab pot bait and chum bait for states from Delaware southward. And some of those states were aware of that. So what we did, can I see, click on that because I have an animation on here. Just click real quick. You can see that, basically ASMFC, it was difficult. Most of the states, and I understandably so, most of the states say we're not going to transfer anything to Virginia because they're already getting so much. But we needed to have a mechanism to allow states to say we want to transfer that to go directly to the bait fishery. So we did it as a pilot study in 2022. Several states reciprocated, and we're very thankful for that. And it helped them out. It kept the bait fishery open for the whole year for the first time in several years because they were catching their quota and had to shut down. And in 2023, we made that permanent. So yes, we did request transfers that last year, but it was going exclusively to the bait fisheries. So next slide, please. As Mr. Slasik and Ms. Campbell also pointed out, we do have fish spills. It's caused by when the per se boats are encircling the nets and start pulling them in, their maneuverability is limited. And then when they come along shore of the mothership and start unloading, that vessel has limited maneuverability. They drift into shallow waters, the net comes in contact with the bottom, they hit an obstruction, the net tears and fish are spilled out. We don't know what the mortality rate on those are. It all depends on how the word that the industry uses, dry the net is, how much they've actually pulled in on the net. And we have, like I said, about 3.4 spills per year on average since 2018. The average spill is about 100,000 fish. We do have a mechanism for them to report that to us, and we document it all in a database, along with any follow-up as well. And as Ms. Campbell pointed out, we had one approximately on July 1st at Silver Beach. It washed ashore on July 4th weekend. We had another one on the same section of beach on July 5th. From Ocean Harvesters, which are the vessels operated by Omega Protein. They were very prompt on calling me and reporting it, and then also then having their contractors go on the beach and clean up the fish. I think the estimate was about 20,000 fish washed ashore. It became an issue because they cleaned them up, but the dumpster sat in the parking lot for quite a long time in the July heat of Virginia because the local municipalities couldn't decide what landfill it should go to because the contractor was not a resident. So it sat there for a while. And as Ms. Campbell pointed out, on July 25th, one of the vessels was fishing off of Kipta Peak State Park, and they noticed there was some red drum in the net, so they rolled the net to get them out. Hopefully they would survive. Those fish started washing ashore along with some Menhaden on Kipta Peak State Park. The beach had to be closed. All total, it was about 10,000 Menhaden, about 6,700 pounds, and about 12,000 pounds of red drum. My staff were able to get some of those samples, and the average fish was 48 inches in length, and the average weight was about 43 pounds. So they were large spawning age red drum. The oldest fish that we aged was 49 years old. So yeah, and when these incidents occurred, along with the campaign to get them out of the bay, brought things to a fever pitch. We started having folks show up at every one of our commission meetings, our monthly commission meetings, and want to speak about Menhaden. We have just like we do here, we have a period of items that are not on the agenda. And it went from 2 people to 5 people to as many as 25 people showing up just to say, what are we going to do about this? The governor was receiving letters, we were receiving letters, answering press releases. You know, the governor said, what are we going to do about this? And we started working on some solutions. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, I hope you can see this, but what came out of this was, this is a culmination of 6 months worth of work, where basically we would provide something to the governor's office. They'd come back and say, this looks good, but let's see this instead. We try something else. Okay, how about this? How about that? But this is the culmination of what came up with it. And it was a proposed temporal and spatial restrictions that were proposed and presented at our December 6th commission meeting. And off to the right is a calendar of the Menhaden 2023 season, which starts May 1st, and the Bay season runs through November 17th. And the green is when the ocean is open. The ocean is still open, and for the Menhaden fleet, the ocean is considered the area of east of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which I don't know if you can see that. It's sort of in purple on that map. What was proposed was, if the bay is closed prior to holidays, you can't have a spill. There's no fishing. You can't have any fish washed ashore. So what was proposed was 4 days prior to Memorial Day, including Memorial Day, 4 days prior to Labor Day, and a whole week around July 4th. It was 17 total days that were proposed. It was about 8.5% of the bay season, and based on historical effort, it was about 6.1% of the bay effort. Also, what was proposed was a buffer around the entire bay, and you can see the green dots on that. Those green dots are 5 years worth of the per seine reduction fleet's effort based on the captain's daily fishing reports. There's also a number of red dots on there that are the per seine bait effort as well. And that buffer is 1 nautical mile from inland water, runs along the east and west coast, runs along and all the way down to Virginia Beach to the state line. And that was proposed as a buffer, as well as an area a half mile on either side of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. That was put there that was a recommendation of the Menhaden Management Advisory Committee. It's already a caution area on NOAA map, so those boats should probably stay out of that area because there's a lot of activity in that area. So it's 1/2 mile on each side. That buffer was about 6.4% of the bay effort, that historical bay effort. Overall for the state, it was about 3%. Next slide, please. So we had, at that meeting, we had over 350 people in our conference room, because that is the capacity. There were a number of people out in the hallway. There were people in the lobby. There were people outside. We presented this. Rob Latour got up and spoke. Dr. Rob Latour from BIMS got up and spoke. Our Secretary of Natural Resources spoke, and we had over 100 people provide public comment. After all was said and done, about 4.5 to 5 hours of that, what was proposed never came to the floor. Instead, there was this motion for a memorandum of understanding where the industry would not fish the weekends of Labor Day and Memorial Day. They wouldn't fish on July 4th. They would not fish over the weekends between Memorial Day and Labor Day. They would not fish around the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, that 1/2 nautical mile on each side. And they would work with the governor's office and the General Assembly members to adjust geographic buffers. So that was what was proposed. Our council said a memorandum of understanding really doesn't have much clout, but it passed our commission 5-4. And that was the end of that meeting. Next slide, please. As a result, the General Assembly brought up more Menhaden issues. The legislators have said in some of the meetings, has there ever been a session that we haven't talked about Menhaden? And nobody could recall of any. There was a bill put forward to eliminate the time restrictions on regulations. Right now, we cannot adopt new regulations for Menhaden except for October through December. That's the only species we have that kind of restrictions on. That got tabled. There was a bill to have a 2-year moratorium on the bay to study the effects of the fishery. That got tabled as well. Senator Lewis, through SB 1388, came up with 10 really good factors that we've talked about in this room before. Ecological reference points, having observers on boat, looking at bycatch, looking at abundance, looking at the economics of the fisheries, looking at a number of things that they wanted VIMS to study, but they wanted the results by December of 2024. So it gave them about, a little bit more than a year and less than 2 years to do that work. Much of that work, as we've already talked about in this room, would take at least 5 years. So when it went to the Appropriations Committee, VIMS worked with them and said, this is going to cost a lot of money. There's really good ideas, and we can take this in little bites and try to work on it. So the final thing that came out from the House and the Senate and the governor, which was signed in March, was that they were going to put forward a proposal of what has to be done and what the cost is going to be and how long it's going to take. And that's going to be due in September of this year. And hopefully the General Assembly will take that up starting next year. Next slide, please. I didn't include the memorandum of understanding in the briefing packet because it hadn't been signed yet. It was just signed on April 20th by representatives from the reduction fleet and the bait fleet, and as well as our secretary and our commissioner. It included all the same items that were proposed on our December 6th meeting, but it also included buffers on the eastern shore that was somewhat smaller than what were proposed earlier, and one on the western side as well. And it also had recommendations for improvements of protocol in response to fish spills. Next slide, please. And this is that same map. It's really hard to see. I don't know why this is so dark, but the black dot you see on the eastern shore, that's Okehanak Creek. So the eastern shore buffer goes from there all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel still has that buffer. And the buffer on the western shore, which is way down by the James River at Hampton at the Hampton fishing pier there, goes along the shoreline and then goes all the way down to Virginia Beach to Sandbridge. You can see the percentages, how many net sets were involved in this as far as the effort over the 5-year period. Overall, effort was displayed. So overall for the period for those that's on there, the 5 years of data for the bait and the reduction fleet, it's about 1.65% of their total effort would be displaced. And that's whereas before it was the previous one was 3%. And we had to stress to the industry that you're not prohibited, you just can't fish in those areas. So it's just displacing the effort. Next slide, please. And based on the recommendations they had for the season, on orange, you can see the numbers very clearly in here, but the orange are the holidays. So the weekends of Memorial Day and Labor Day and July 4th. And the red is the weekends during the summertime. And it was 39 closed days, so it's about almost 19.4% of the base season would be closed. However, they don't, the purse seine fisheries really don't fish the weekends very often, so only 0.61% of the bay effort would be displaced versus what we proposed earlier, it was almost 6.1%. So the reason that they probably don't fish, it's their labor is unionized, so they're working weekends and on holidays is probably cost inhibitive to them, but they don't work that time, so there's really not much impact on this. Next slide, please. And then finally, the fish spill protocol. I mean, we have a protocol in place where Andy Hall, who's their operation manager, whenever there's a spill, he calls me right away, and we document certain things. We have a database that we've been maintaining since 2018. We have follow-ups if there's more phone calls. If there's a cleanup on a beach, we document that as well. But we want to try to have better communications with that, better logging of information, reporting information to the local municipalities that may be impacted if these spills come ashore, because the industry knows if the wind is going from the right direction, they know these fish are coming ashore, and they know that, and they'll go ahead and have their contractors ready to be on the beaches when that occurs. We're going to maintain the database, and we're also going to be looking at any historical spills we can find. Anytime a spill comes ashore, it made the news, so we can look at old news archives and find that. But before 2018, most of this was just via emails. And the industry is looking at ways that if they do have a spill, how can they keep it from washing ashore? Omega has bought a skimming vessel that they plan on using. It's been recommended that they have spill simulation exercises so that everybody knows what has to be done when something occurs. And we plan on having regular meetings with the purse seine vessel captains and the spotter planes on a regular basis, just to keep them aware of that. You have to be careful when you're out there, when you're doing these kind of things. And if you see your depth is starting to get too shallow, then maybe not set the nets. So that's all I have. This is just a next slide, please. But I want to just say that, we have been spending a disproportionate amount of time on Menhaden. As with many of you, we have a number of species. I think we have 38 species or species groups that we manage in our state that deserve our attention as well. And we've been spending a lot of our time doing redundant FOIA requests and doing legal challenges and responding to letters to the governor and other responses of those nature, that we've been spending a lot of our time doing that. And, blue crabs is an issue that we have right now that we're not giving attention, because we're spending all of our time on this. And I've said that on the record before, and it's like, it's a species that, we are concerned about. The governor's aware of this. We're all supporting additional research, and that research has to be funded, and it's going to take time to get the information to make decisions. So that's all I have, and I'll take any questions if anybody has anything.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Thanks for the thorough written report that we all have, and thank you for that report. And it's really obvious, as you've said, I mean, the Commonwealth is engaged. I mean, it's the governor, the secretary, the General Assembly, the commission, the advisory panel. I mean, it's something that you're obviously working at, and appreciate the summary of all that. And I think that is a really good point too about, if you're going to shift the way you manage a fishery, it needs to be based on solid data. And if you want more robust, solid data, it requires money. So that's of course, with all of our fisheries, we run into that. The process that we follow is a very exact process that needs to be driven by solid data, and solid data costs money. And that's, So any questions for Pat? Yeah, Rob.
Thank you very much for a very full report. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot just from listening to what you said. I just want to understand, when you do this, when a spill takes place, how is that accounted for against your allocations? In other words, how do you account for that? Because I tried to understand what was happening.
That's a good point. Right now, it's not. That's one of the things that our Menhaden Management Advisory Committee had made a recommendation that it be held against the quota. But the problem is the spotter planes know they have an estimate how many fish when they set on it. They have an estimate, but they don't know what to survive. What's the mortality rate of that spill? And we'd have to kind of figure that out. And we could assume 100% mortality. We would have to change our regulation about that, but that has been brought up.
Thank you very much. And just to follow up, if I might, so in essence, will the studies that you're talking about, the ones that are now funded, will they start to look into that a little bit more?
Right now, none of them are funded.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't receive it. That bill went to the Appropriations Committee, and when they asked VIMS, and we knew this was going to be multi-million dollars of research, and that's why they said, all right, come to us with a full plan. Nothing's been funded yet.
And so that'll be revisited in September.
VIMS is going to have a report to our House and Senate Natural Resources Committee by September 1 of this year. Okay. So they'll be able to enact, they could have some planning for the budget for next year.
Okay, great. John Clark and then Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Pat. I was just curious, obviously it seems like awareness of spills and things like that have increased, and the amount of fishing going on in the bay. Has any of this been attributed to the change in ownership of Omega, or has it not been tracked so that you can tell if there's any difference in where they're fishing and how they're fishing?
I'm not sure about that. I think, in 2019, when they exceeded the bay cap, that's about when Cook bought the company. But the statement we got was that the bay cap was 87,000 metric tons. And so if you recall, Omega Protein sat in this room and said that, they were not going to, they said, we're not going to catch all of that. They were looking at that as that the bay cap was 87,000 metric tons. So at that time, but I don't think there's been much change in their behavior and how they catch it. But it's in that one instance, that first year, it was interesting that they just recently purchased the company, and that first year they had that overage. No.
All right. Yes, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Pat, for that presentation. Is there ever, now that you guys are able to take transfers from other states to a sector, is there ever a case where the bait fishery has transferred back to the reduction fishery? And is there something that would prevent, if the bait fisheries were to receive a transfer and not consume it, is there anything to block that transferred quota from being retransferred over to the reduction? Is that a case that could happen? I'm just curious how that dynamic works.
Well, we've only done it 1 year so far, so it's hard to judge. But we were kind of surprised when we started looking at this that we didn't have the ability internally to transfer, because as one thing said, what happens if a bait, their dock, they had a fire and they couldn't fish anymore? So would they be able to transfer? It has the ability to go both ways. Theoretically, we could transfer out at that point, but right now our regulation says we can't transfer out until the season ends. So, but so far it's been going to the bait. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Maybe I have a wrong understanding of this. I have a few contacts of my own with your state, and sometimes are the ones that catch the bait, catch a bait that may be of lesser quality. And it's my understanding that the reduction fishery takes that off their hands. Are you aware of that?
We have two purse seine bait individuals, if you're talking about purse seine. One of them does work with omega protein. They do unload there, but it's separated out into reduction. We get reports for what's reduction and what's bait.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to point out is that sometimes there is less than a good quality bait that is taken in, and sometimes the reduction fishery can accept that and use it where it's not discharged as a byproduct, which I think is a positive thing. And I'm also aware that some of those people that are employed by them are your locals. Would that be correct?
Or what?
Or locals, the local people.
Locals, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Pat, for your very comprehensive report. I'm just wondering, I mean, I understand the jurisdictional issues about whose landfill Menhaden's going to go. We run into that on Long Island as well. But I'm just wondering, why didn't it just go to Omega? Try and let them cook it.
They did take a lot of the red drum to Omega. The Menhaden wasn't a whole lot of Menhaden. I don't know why. I don't know why they didn't take it. It's, maybe, I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do it.
So if there's nothing else right now, we're kind of in the weeds on some of this. I'd encourage you to just maybe get up with Pat when you get a second. If you got additional questions or things you think of, I'd like to move us along to our next agenda item, where at the end we do have an action to take. So Dr. Katie Drew is going to work us through the next item, which is an update on the single species and ERP stock assessments, and then we'll have to approve some terms of reference, which is always really exciting. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll try to go through this quickly. So starting with the ERP assessment, the board is going to review and hopefully approve the TORs at this meeting. We've scheduled our methods scoping webinar for later this month, and then a data and methods workshop, which will be in person in October. So this is sort of the kickoff for the ERP assessment, where we look at the data that we have, try to pull in new data, and then decide what we're going to do, what our overall goals are for the assessment models, what we're going to update and focus on for the benchmark. We will be doing a press release and a call for data and model submission before that October workshop to bring in any potential external data or models for the ERP assessment. So the bigger changes on the single species assessment side, the SAS recommends changing the single species from a benchmark assessment to an assessment update. And there's several reasons for this. First of all, there are no changes to the single species model planned. So the BAM is a solid, well-developed model that has been peer-reviewed multiple times. And we are not planning any changes to the model structure. And in addition, there have been no new Menhaden data sources identified that could go into this model that would warrant a benchmark assessment. So basically, we would not accomplish anything with a benchmark that we could not accomplish with an update. And in addition, an update reduces the workload for the TC and the SAS, many of whom overlap with the ERP work group, as well as staff and the peer review panel, and allows more time and energy to be focused on the ERP assessment. And in fact, one of the peer review recommendations at the last benchmark was don't bring this single species back next time if you're not going to make any major changes, because it is a lot of work to develop that assessment to warrant a benchmark, and then to have a peer review panel give it the same amount of time and attention as the ERP assessment is not the best use of everybody's time. So that is why we are recommending that the single species go down to an assessment update. And this will be sort of the stock assessment subcommittee and TC put this forward or recommended this. The assessment science committee, which handles the scheduling of ASMFC assessments, reviewed this decision and approved it and is recommending it to the policy board. So we are bringing it for here to you guys to get this on your radar, but the policy board will make the final decision on that front. So the things to remember about this, the ERP assessment will remain a benchmark. So we'll have a full peer review of that. If problems arise during the single species assessment or new data sources are identified that would warrant a benchmark for the single species assessment, we can revert back to the benchmark and undergo peer review at the ERP assessment. So we do sort of have an emergency fallback plan if necessary. And then the single species model will undergo a full benchmark with the ERP assessment in 2031, when hopefully we're coming back to this spatial question, and where we will have made significant changes to the BAM in order to support a more spatially developed model. And so with that, I can take any questions about the progress on these two assessments.
Yeah, any questions about that? And so just to be clear, so 2025 single species will be an update, and the ERP will be benchmarked. So any comments, questions, discussion of that? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Katie, as always. Just a couple clarifying questions specifically on the ERP benchmark stock assessment, TORs. First, for both the internal and the peer review terms of reference, it mentions that there would be an assessment of the data sources for predator and prey species included in the ERP models. I know when that was developed the last time around, there were several other species that were evaluated but not included at the time. So I just want to clarify for the record that the data call that you all are planning would incorporate a data call for maybe other species that were not previously included in the mice model.
So yes, absolutely. This would be a very general call. So anything, and then the TC or the ERP work group would review those data submissions and sort of line it up with what we are interested in doing from a modeling perspective. And if they align and provide new information, they could be included regardless of whether they are species that were or were not included last time.
Okay, that might just be worth clarifying, because the way it's written, it just says included in the ERP model. So it might be more clear if that was broadened a little bit. Mr. Chair, if I had a follow-up question as well.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So the other issue that I just want to clarify will be looked at through the ERP assessment is one that has been of concern within the Chesapeake Bay, which is the change in the age composition of the reduction landings. We've seen over the past couple of years a shift to younger fish, and I just wanted to be sure that that was something that could be looked at as part of this round of the ERP assessment. Thanks.
Sure. So that would probably actually, that could be addressed through either the single species or the multi-species. So we would obviously bring in, the observed data on the age composition of the reduction fishery and the bait fishery as part of the update for the single species model. We could consider adding a selectivity block at the end if we think there is something that would be warranted in the way changes to the way the fishery has operated. So that information would be processed through the single species model and then sort of transferred over to the ERP models, depending on what the ERP model itself could handle. But it is something that could be explored and investigated through the single species update and through the benchmark for the ERP.
Yeah, Connor and then Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Katie, for that. Quick question. I guess I'm just curious from the working group perspective, do you anticipate a new suite of models being brought forth based on recent work that's been done in the field over the last several years since the last peer review, or do you anticipate the workload primarily focused on the inclusion or exclusion of models previously examined in the last go around?
So I think that's what we would like to make the decision on at the October workshop. So we will be opening it up to, I think we would like to pursue that multi-model approach. I think it was very helpful for us last time. So we will for sure update and improve the NWACS mice model, which is our current base model. We will update and extend the NWACS full model for comparisons. And then I think the question is, where do we want to, what else do we want to consider? For example, the multi-species statistical catch-at-age model, are we in a position to update that to bring it more in line with our management objectives? Do we want to look at maybe something like indicators? Do we want to look at the production models further or switch to maybe a different approach? And so I think we would be looking to both the work that our ERP work group members have done or have been involved with, as well as opening this up as a call for additional external collaborators to bring us things.
Thank you, Katie. And Mr. Chair, when you're ready, I'm happy to prepare a motion.
Rob, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just another follow-up question. I think you might have answered it here, but I just want to get clarification. Atlantic herring, how would that be incorporated? Wasn't that a difficulty in the last go of this? And I know it's got an overfish status. I'm just trying to make certain I understand how that species will be incorporated into the ERP model. Thank you.
Sure. So we will have an update of the herring assessment to go into these models, and I think we're interested in looking at some of the seasonal component to kind of get a better handle on that particular relationship, where it appears that the relationship between striped bass and herring is important and intense, but maybe only in specific seasons. And so that seems to make the model a little sensitive. So I think that's one of our high priority steps for the model development, is a better spatial handle for that species specifically, but it will be part of the consideration.
I just want to thank you for your amazing work on this stuff. Really, it's unbelievable. Thank you.
I mean, obviously a team effort, and thank you. We have a great working group on this, so thank you. So since we're running short on time, I won't actually put the terms of reference up on the board. I'm sure you guys have had a chance to read them. Hopefully you don't feel the need to walk through them in person, but if you had specific questions about the TORs that we have not addressed, we can go to them directly. But otherwise, I think we would hope that you had a chance to read them as part of the materials.
So our one action item here for this session was to approve the terms of reference. We have a motion to, yes, Connor.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to read the motion?
Please.
I'd like to move to approve the terms of reference for the 2025 Atlantic Menhaden Ecological Reference Point Benchmark Stock Assessment and Peer Review.
We have a second by Ray. Discussion of the motion. Discussion is approval of the terms of reference. Very straightforward. Don't see any hands. Any objection to approval of the motion? Don't see any hands, so the motion carries unanimously. All right. There's no other business to come before the Menhaden board. Have a motion to adjourn. Ray, second. Connor, okay. We are adjourned.